Okay, thank you. So the title of my talk is Blockchain Vulnerability Management and Disclosure. What I am going to talk about a bit more in specifics is how we have managed in Go Ethereum, how to treat this blockchain when there is a vulnerability. We have this beating heart that beats once every 14 seconds, and we don't want that to be interrupted, but need to fix things, which is not a simple problem. And to start off, I'm going to talk about this incident which happened in November 2020, where a consensus issue was triggered on the Ethereum network. And the background to that is that we had a kind of long-standing consensus issue which we fixed in November 2019. No, sorry, that was when we broke it, and we fixed it. We got a report in July 2020, and we fixed it silently in Geth 1917, also in July. So that's a couple of months earlier, before this split happened. So when we did fix it, we got Geth back into consensus with the other clients out there, and also, importantly, with the specification itself. Obviously, it broke consensus with earlier Geth releases. And as time passed, we kind of started to feel certain that, yeah, the crisis was over. It's been 4 months since we made this release. However, not all node operators had upgraded to this release. So Infura was still on versions that were like more than 4 months old. So some old Geth nodes split off from the rest of the network, and also people relying on Infura got disruptions in their operations. And this caused a bit of a social media backlash and general discussion, like how can you guys be this reckless with vulnerabilities? What right do you kind of have to silently fix patches and do upgrades to vulnerabilities, and how can you take the liberty of allowing users to run with high impact vulnerabilities on their nodes? So that's kind of what I want to bring up today, and some discussion points about. Oftentimes when we talk about securities, we talk about these CVSS numbers, where we have the vulnerability rating from 0 to 10. They kind of have these fancy advanced ways to calculate them in base score and temporal and environmental, and there's kind of complex functions to derive this mathematical value, which of course is very subjective in the end. But more importantly, yeah, and I mean, this is useful. If you're a big organization which have thousands of computers or a very large set of software deployed in your corporate environment, this is good to have the CVSS numbers. Because you can kind of pinpoint where you're at, and are we far behind? Yeah, all these Windows servers are like way behind. We need to get them up to speed. So when you have this like software is cattle mental model, it's less useful when you have like this software is pets kind of mentality, where we care only about one thing. And the CVSS kind of implicitly assumes that what you are protecting is the hardware itself, right? If you have this Windows environment, the environment is what you are protecting, and the service is the email server, and the value, the asset is also the email server or the underlying hardware. That's not the case for us. Our asset that we want to protect at all costs is the Ethereum network. And most often, I mean, so if the vulnerability is indeed something that harms the node operator, it's different considerations need to be taken versus if the thing that is being threatened is the chain. So example of vulnerabilities that would exploit, harm the node operators, or if there were to be a remote command execution, something that grants file access or leaks on uninitialized memory with cryptographic keys. And that has not been something we've seen a lot. I think never for Go Ethereum. Those that we have seen more often are consensus vulnerabilities, different types of DOS, either via like crash on block processing, as happened in Shanghai, the Shanghai attacks, or just peer-to-peer networking crashes, where under certain conditions, if you connect to a peer, perhaps, or while a peer is syncing and using you as a sync source, you can send it some malicious message. And therefore, when we put out some Go Ethereum update and make an announcement that this is a high severity, it almost always means that, as for the node operator, this might be of zero risk to his assets, his computer, but a higher disturbance for the Ethereum as an asset. However, the outcome of the discussions that were had on this partial consensus issue is that we realized that we need to be more public about these things. And we published this official policy that you can find on our Geth docs, where it says that we will do, I'll come to that later, that we reserve the right to do sneaky updates, which we do not disclose publicly. We also started publishing a JSON vulnerability feed, a signed feed. And using this feed, we built in a vulnerability check in Go Ethereum, which for now does not run automatically, but if you do just Geth version check, it will check upstream, fetch this feed, and see if there's anything worth noticing. And you can also do it for some older version. I've run it first once with and define 0 vulnerabilities, and then I specify an older version string, and it shows me that, yeah, for this one there are 3 vulnerabilities. And time went by. Later on, in August 2021, we got another report about a consensus issue in Go Ethereum. This was the return data corruption via data copy. So during certain very niche conditions on the EVM memory would be corrupted. And this was a kind of unique bug because the fix for this bug was pretty vague. I mean, it could be fixed in a way that was not at all pointing any fingers to where the bug was, as opposed to most fixes we've done. They are kind of, if you look at the patch, it's usually kind of obvious what the bug is. And we figured that this is actually not so. And also the triggering this vulnerability was kind of difficult. You need to figure out that it concerns the precompile, specifically one of them, and it can only be triggered if you have input and output which offsets each other, which like overlap, but with an offset, and touches the return data. So we decided that, yeah, people are annoyed when we sneak patch stuff, so let's just try to make it the other way around. I mean, this one time we can do that, because hoping that the window of time between the publication that there is a vulnerability and there is a patch, and the window given by the difficulty of finding the exploit versus the window that people updates, we might just win the race, who knows. So we did, this time we did a pre-announce, there will be a new release, make sure to update your nodes. We merged the fix into another PR, made the release, The idea was to wait a couple of weeks and then publicly disclose like what is the bug and see if this transparency would work. 3 days later, we had to issue this post-mortem that there had been another minority split. So we released the v1.10.8 containing the fix on a Tuesday morning, on the 24th of August. And 3 days later, this was exploited. So it was exploited after 3 days. It can be argued whether this was a success or a failure. The upside to this is that, I mean, the obvious downside is that there was a consensus split and some nodes got kicked off the network. But the upside was that this was only a minority fork. And those forks heal themselves. I mean, the chain will progress. Some nodes will fall off, but the canonical chain will continue. And of course, with this having happened, we didn't need to have these 4 months of waiting and hoping that people upgrade in time and that it isn't exploited. Because one of the worst things that can happen is that we have an invalid majority chain where there is this similar split, but only the like 5% who did the upgrade are kicked off. Because then we will be in a world of pain and having to make these decisions like, should we try to coordinate socially in order to get a major reorg to a much shorter chain, which would be take a large toll on like the whole ecosystem, I think. And so patching these things are very difficult. So anytime we make these silent patches, we have to live with an uncertainty. Will this be detected and exploited? Most likely, if it is detected, it will be exploited, unfortunately. Here's another example from vulnerability disclosures on blockchains. This is Zcash. They have this counterfeiting vulnerability. So Zcash has a failure mode which doesn't really exist on Ethereum, because on Ethereum all the balances are public. But on Zcash these things can happen, that there is actually someone counterfeits money and it simply cannot be detected. And for them, they detected this internally on March 1, 2018. And it took basically until October, they managed to do a hard fork. And at that point, when the hard fork was made, only 4 people were aware about this vulnerability. And if I recall correctly, like the day after they deployed the update, that's when they informed the security guy and then the like COO. So they're like keeping it very, very close. And it took another, not until 11 months afterwards was the full public disclosure made. Third example, you probably heard of the Solana bridge attack. So there was this bridge between Ethereum and Solana, and an attacker made it look like 120,000 Ether had been, or actually more, had been deposited into the wormhole on the Solana side, so you can withdraw, he could then withdraw 90,000 Ether on the Ethereum side. This was also something that was found internally, but what they did was they just committed the fix to GitHub. It took a couple of hours, someone watched it and exploited it. They could have exploited it themselves. That would probably have been the better route. Instead of committing it, they could maybe have paused it. I'm not that certain of how that bridge works. And some of the questions, like we need to ask ourselves, like how we might at some point be faced with the choice of pausing the chain or doing something that really would disrupt the Ethereum in order to get a serious vulnerability fixed. How would we handle the case where we have a majority chain that is not obviously bad enough to warrant a reorg? Just maybe? Or would we be willing to enshrine this erroneous behavior? And that's one of the problems with having a supermajority client like Geth. We need a wider range of use nodes. And right, auto updatability. Parity had that at one point. We've been a bit scared to implement that in Geth, but maybe that's something we need to reconsider. That's one of the questions we're thinking about. I think my time is up, and that's all I had. So I think we have some time for questions. Thank you.
Anybody has a question?
You mentioned silently patching the bugs. So at what point do you think how do you decide it's safe to disclose those bugs?
So what we have in our vulnerability disclosure now is we've said that after a period of 4 to 8 weeks, we will disclose that a certain version was indeed a vulnerability fix. So after 4 weeks, we can say the latest version fixed the vulnerability, and then after another 4 to 8 weeks, we will disclose what the vulnerability was. In the back.
So I didn't hear the first part of the talk, but I heard a lot about the end part, and so apologies if this is a repeated information, but when you're doing disclosures, or really when you're putting out a patch and then disclosures, do you ever go to large parties like someone that's running a lot of nodes and give them early warning of that so you can emphasize their need to update, or does everyone find out at the same time? And if it's the first thing, then how do you decide?
Yeah, good question. So what we have done is we have reached out to projects to sub-projects, downstream projects, and we do so at a time when we don't feel threatened by the bug itself. So first we make sure that Ethereum is fine and Ethereum is safe. And within that I include Aragon. So they're also on Ethereum and they share our code base. After that we have reached out to these Matic, Polygon, Optimism, even BSC actually. And we also, after the whole discussion with the vulnerability fixes, we have some other channels. We have a Geth Announce mailing list that projects can subscribe to. We were a bit unwilling to treat certain parties differently. It would be a bit unfair if we always have special relations with Infura, but not their competitor, or we have with Etherscan, but not blah blah. But it's kind of hard. People want us to make sure that some people want us to tell Infura about fixes, and from the other hand, that's kind of not the way we should do it. So it's difficult. It's on a bit of a case-to-case.
I can sympathize. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Having been there already a couple times, even ourselves in the last year, one of the issues is when there's a vulnerability and it's going to take time to resolve and you don't want to reveal it, you at least want to be watching, is somebody exploiting it?
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. How does it stand in your ability to know if these exploits are actually happening in the wild?
So one of the things that we do have for these purposes is the forkmon for Ethereum nodes, and that is basically a dashboard. We connected to a number of nodes, Nethermind, so we tried to get all of the nodes in there, Aragon, Nethermind, Bisu, Geth, old version, Geth even older, and Open Ethereum. And then just compare where they're at in the chain, and then if they start to report different heads and report obvious clashes, then that helps us detect forks in real time.
All right. Thank you, Martin, for the fantastic talk. And I'm sure people have questions, and please find Martin. And thank you.